Paula V, it's important to note, her mom is here tonight watching. So if you don't like something that she says and you say it in the chat, her mom is watching. And you're going to have to deal with her mom.
We're strong-arming everyone here now.
I am indeed. Paula V is a fantastic writer and a cultural and media critic. We're going to throw some links down in the chat for some recent articles that she has written so you can get familiar with her. But more importantly, she is wearing Watchmen yellow tonight. So that's how you know she's prepared for the show. This is the last installment of our fun summer series, Binge Fest, that we are doing. Thank you all so much for coming. We've had 3 really good shows. We watched Bosch season 6 to start off. Then we did Little Fires Everywhere, and we're closing it out with Watchmen tonight. Hopefully some of you saw the Emmys on Sunday, the super weird Emmys. Did you watch the Emmys, Paula V?
They were really weird.
That was really weird, but also like somehow more intimate and entertaining than the normal ones.
I feel like people have been liking these new events where we're seeing people face to face versus this like large room of distant celebrities.
Maybe it's the proximity to their faces that actually matter.
Or right? Like in their homes.
Yeah. Like when the woman from Ozark won, whose name all of a sudden has escaped me, and she was sitting there and she clearly was a little drunk.
Was it Julia
Garner?
Yeah.
She was a little drunk, a little nervous, and her husband was wearing a robe and was sitting beside her. And they both seemed a little sweaty, like maybe they didn't have good AC in their house. And she seemed like sort of genuinely shocked that she had won an Emmy. Mm-hmm. That's far more exciting than seeing someone in like a really nice dress, trip up the stairs, and then
or
Chris
make
Rock
that like the gracious winner face.
Right. I really like seeing people seem sort of wildly disappointed by their losses.
Did you see Rami Youssef was like filming the guy who was just waiting outside his door and then he just walks away?
It's so weird. But I think that sort of intimacy was cool, and particularly for the people who won for Watchmen, because I had just spent a bunch of time rewatching the show, and so I felt like I knew them again. But seeing Regina King win, and she was just wearing like a jacket and then a Breonna Taylor shirt, which is notable today.
For Talks by Schiaparelli, I think.
Yes. And she won her award, and she gave us just the most impassioned speech. And, you know, like you could tell that her family and friends were around because she was sort of looking around at them. That was so cool. I liked that.
Yeah.
That was so
I know.
Cool.
It was like easy.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, Paula V is a writer, a critic. She's also an MFA candidate here at UCR. She is graduating in December, come hell, high water, or pandemic. She's getting it. And then she's going to be a big-time famous writer. And then when you see her on the streets, you'll be like, oh, my God, I saw you talking with Todd Goldberg on that thing. Is he as cool as he seems? And she'll be like, yes. And then she'll be like, oh, but I'm a big-time famous writer.
And it'll all be thanks to UCR Plum Desert.
And the Watchmen Binge Fest that we're doing. So anyway, everybody, we're going to chat for about 45 minutes or so about everything. And then we'll open it up for questions and discussion, all that sort of good stuff. So if you have something that needs to be said immediately, you can alert us by screaming, screaming into the abyss, or just write a question down and we'll check it out. But let's get started. So I have to admit something, and this is probably terrible. I have never read the Watchmen comic before. Not a single word of it. And I know that's odd because also like part of this show is about adaptations, but this isn't actually an adaptation of the comic. This is something a little bit different. It is sort of a continuation of the comic or the graphic novel, right, Paula?
Yeah, it's kind of an imagining of the future of a world that ended very specifically. But Lindelof, he took details from the comic and from the world and applied them in a way that was just completely relevant to 2019. And, maybe from having learned some lessons from Lost, every one of his threads got tied at the end. And it
Yeah.
was just tight. It was really kind of perfect.
But you read the comic not when it originally came out, because you told me it
No,
came out when you were 2, and
2
apparently your
years old.
mom, who's here, didn't read it to you
No, I
before
was not
bedtime.
aware of the comic in 1986 when it came out.
When did you first read it?
I read it, I think, in anticipation of the film that came out in 2009. So it would have been 2008 or 2009. I know that right before that film, they had a huge reprinting of it. And so that's where this came from. Um, this is the one I had 12 years ago. And yeah, I think I had not really heard of it until all of the hype around the movie. But because it's DC, because it's Alan Moore who has done stuff like he created Constantine, he did The Killing Joke, he did League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, V for Vendetta. I was like, oh, well, I'm gonna have to read this. And it was, I mean, it's groundbreaking. It's one of Time Magazine's 100 best novels. It basically started the telling of superhero stories in a way that's really dark and psychological. So like we probably wouldn't have the Nolan Batman films if it weren't for this book. So I think that's why people saw it as something completely different. It was a criticism of superheroes, but not in a satirical way, in a really kind of human way. Do you want me to talk about what happens in it?
Yes, but first let me find out something more important. Well, that's not more important, equally important. Were you a graphic novel fan already at this point? Was this an entry drug for you? Where did it fall sort of in your fandom?
A little bit. I was into manga in college. I was definitely into DC Comics and Batman stuff when I was in high school and college. So I had some allegiance to DC and was into anime and stuff. So this fell in my wheelhouse, but it was not something like I think that people who were comic book aficionados obviously knew about this book way before I did.
Because it's weird, I didn't get into graphic novels. Like I was never a comics kid, never. And maybe it's because when I would have gotten into comics, I couldn't read, so I was profoundly dyslexic, and so I didn't really read until I was about 10 or 11, which would probably be like the entry level period where I would have gotten into comic books, right? And so by the time I could read, I was actually just reading. And then I was playing with like Star Wars action figures and stuff, commonly called dolls. But I just never got into it. And then it wasn't really until the mid 2000s when I started reading graphic novels, when they sort of became more ubiquitous in the culture. And I think that's probably about the time that the Watchmen movie came out and all this sort of stuff in the culture became, part of things I was aware of, because then I did read Constantine, and I went back and I read, some of the classics of the genre, and I really found that I liked sort of the noir storytelling. And that's the thing about Watchmen that is really evident, is that Alan Moore, from the films that I've seen, obviously, is really influenced by classic noir tropes on top of everything else.
Weird that this one fell through the cracks then for you.
Yeah, it is weird, but I also have a weird aversion towards superheroes.
Okay, well,
and the
that's probably why you liked the show and why you would also like the book.
Yeah, like I like a messed up superhero. Like that's why I like The Boys, the Amazon show The Boys. Is like I want a superhero who's got some pretty deep flaws. I don't just want a perfect person flying around saving humanity. Like Superman's a punk. Give me Batman.
I think Alan Moore knew that, and that's exactly what he was getting at. I think that by the 80s, people were probably a little tired of that idealistic portrayal. And this is where, there's a lot of stuff in here, and we can talk about how the show differs, but there's a lot of stuff in here about like retired superheroes, male potency.
Yes, let's discuss that. That won't be awkward at all. Well, tell us a little bit about the comic, because this is the thing that I know for viewers and viewers, you can tell us when we get to that point. Like, I didn't know what was happening for the first 3 or 4 episodes of the show. I just knew I was really into it, but I had no idea what was going on. But you had read the comic, so give us sort of the brief background on the comic itself.
Yeah, let me make sure I don't miss anything here. I've got some stuff written down. Basically, the show, the comic book is set in 1985. The show is set 34 years later in 2019. But it starts with, it's basically an alternate history, so kind of like a plot against America or a Man in
Mm-hmm.
High Castle, where in 1938, time skews because of the formation of this vigilante group called the Minutemen. A bunch of, it's weird to call them superheroes because none of them have superpowers. They're just like guys in hoods and masks. But because of,
Which I'm naturally dubious about.
yeah, exactly, which that's another theme of this, but because of their involvement with like the government and law enforcement and stuff, history takes a different course. So we win Vietnam largely because at that point, Dr. Manhattan, who is the only one that has powers, shows up and wins us Vietnam. Richard Nixon is president still in the 80s because he repeals term limits. And so that feels real and scary for right now. So this is kind of the alternate timeline, but the book starts with the murder of one of the original Minutemen, the comedian, and the second guard of superheroes, Rorschach, Silk Spectre 2, Night Owl 2, they are kind of investigating his murder. And so they learn that one of their other kind, Adrian Veidt, orchestrated the whole murder out of this grander plan to save humanity from nuclear annihilation, because of course this is also the time of the Cold War. So there are a lot of themes around communism, fascism, because, you know, the 80s. And so aside from a critique of superhero culture, this is also a critique of the Reagan era in a lot of ways, and that superheroes are meant to also exemplify what our leaders were doing, which is trying to show that they were protecting humanity, but then probably doing greater damage. So there were a lot of political critiques in this.
And I have a nervous breakdown, Pallavi.
This is supposed to be cathartic, Todd.
Just want to make sure. Okay, go ahead.
That was basically it. I mean, you know, what I said before about the psychological, we get background on what created each of these superheroes. That's something that Lindelof does too. I mean, Rorschach is obviously like probably the most Freudian thing that you can get. So that's,
I mean, boldly Freudian.
yeah, like it is very,
it's uptext.
So that's, I mean, it's interesting because you're getting characters because of, it is like Batman in some ways, right? That there's some kind of fetish. I think someone called this like Citizen Kane of comic books. So
oh, I like that.
there you
I
go.
like that. So we should mention just also that the show is created by Damon Lindelof, who is one of the co-creators of Lost, among other shows, but also The Leftovers, which is a great show. And Lindelof gets a lot of flack for Lost because they clearly, and I had friends that were writing on the show, so I know this is true, they clearly had no idea what was going on. And so in that first season, they just sort of have an idea. They'd be like, well, we should have a smoke monster. Yeah, it's a good idea. Let's throw a smoke monster. Hey, let's have a polar bear. Yeah, let's have a fucking polar bear. Let's throw a polar bear. And I read an interview with Lindelof about the making of Watchmen, and he said very plainly, like, hey, I learned my lesson. Like, I'm not going to put stuff in there that I don't have an answer for. That being said, the elephant in episode 7 is never quite explained.
Well, I was thinking, and he said it again. I think Veidt says something about an elephant later, but I was thinking, what if it's because they never forget?
That's what I was thinking. Like that's the clear metaphor for it. But so Lindelof, you know, to his credit, has really learned from his mistakes and Lost. I mean, I got really frustrated with Lost because I never felt like it knew where it was going. And my first sense in the first 3 episodes of The Watchmen was there is no way they're going to be able to pull this together. Like, there's no possible way any of this is ever going to make sense. And then by the 9th and final episode, it all makes sense. It all makes sense. So we're gonna reveal spoilers here. So if you haven't seen all the way through, we are going to talk about the giant squid and things like that. So the giant squid is in the comic books, correct?
Yeah, that's the way it ends. He sends down a giant squid to try to unite humanity's world powers by showing that we're actually under attack by aliens, so we all have to get on the same team. The film actually changed that, and they made Adrian frame Dr. Manhattan, and so he sent out a bunch of blasts that looked like Dr. Manhattan had done them.
Right.
At the time, I liked that more, but then Lindelof really made me love the squid.
Yeah, I like the squid too, and I like the way that they use it in the last episode. And I like the using of the giant squid as a feint to save humanity. It's almost as though we're living through a thing where millions of people have gotten sick and died. And you would think that would be the sort of thing in our current world that would bring us together to fight a common existential threat, Pavi. Like, that's what you would think.
I mean,
that's not true.
That's a squid? I don't know.
What I'm saying is, I think Damon Lindelof predicted the pandemic.
He 100% did. He put everyone in masks. He predicted all of 2020.
Rewatching the show was the only time where I felt comfortable in scenes because everyone's wearing a mask. Like, and I'm sure that for those of you in the audience, like, it's a weird thing right now, like when you're watching a television show and you see people kiss, or you see strangers coming into contact, or just a big crowd scene or whatever, and you're like, why aren't they wearing masks? If you're really engaged, you start thinking about it as reality. That's what great TV does for you, right? But in this, there's a great scene. It's in episode 5 when Angela goes back into the police station, and that's when she takes her grandfather's pills, which leads into the most amazing hour of television ever in episode 6. But she's walking through, and everyone's wearing the neck gaiters properly over their nose and mouth. And I was like, this is like a PSA.
Yeah.
They should send this out to everybody.
And what's ironic is that it was like the super right-wing senator who was masterminding all of that.
Isn't that ironic? So, okay, so the show itself, it launches last fall, so right about this time, actually, last year, and it's on HBO, and so that means you have to go week by week to enjoy it. It's not one of these newfangled streaming shows where you get everything in one day. And I actually think the experience of watching it over the course of 2 months was better than if I had watched it all at once, because I think I would have lost some of the nuance of the characters and of just the amazing filmmaking that was going on in the series, because I thought about it and I rewatched some stuff. What was your thought? I mean, it is a different viewing experience. It's what we did for the first 70 years of television, but
yeah, well, it's interesting to hear you say that you were like completely lost and kind of anticipated it wouldn't go anywhere. I think that I was also kind of like, what's happening? But it felt to me, maybe because I had some more context, it felt to me like he was really deliberately building. And yes, I also feel like watching it week to week made that sense feel stronger to me, because I just re-binged it over the past few days. And yeah, there are things that get lost, because if you're inundated with all of this imagery, which is really rich and really vivid, you can miss stuff. And so it's true. I think the process of having him build that tension for us was cool.
Well, in particular, after the first episode, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, but it turns out that I'm part of a larger ignorance. I had absolutely no idea that the opening of Watchmen, the race riots in 1921 in Tulsa, were real. I had no idea. None.
I didn't either. I was like, oh, it's an alternate history. But then I was like, oh, wait, no, the alternate history doesn't start till 1938.
Yeah, and so, when they're talking about Black Wall Street and all this stuff, and, planes dropping bombs on people, it was the planes dropping bombs on people where I was like, okay, so this is a different world. But that's all true. Mm-hmm. And what happened in the formulation of Watchmen itself is that Damon Lindelof read an amazing essay by the writer Ta-Nehisi Coates that was in The Atlantic about the 1921 riots in Tulsa. And he had never heard of them either. Yeah. And he realized that it would be a great leaping off point for the sort of larger social context of the show, which is different than the social context of the comic, if I understand correctly. The social context of the show obviously is about race and class, and also about sexual identity. When you find out that Hooded Justice is bisexual, like, it just happens. There's no discussion of it. It's just there.
Well, I think the undercurrent of fascism is what is common in both
Mhm.
the show and the book.
But like the ability after watching that first episode to go find out the information and read that essay and then read the little scholarship that was out there about that gave me a whole new, deeper appreciation that if I had just sat down on a Friday night at 5 o'clock and went to bed at 4 a.m. with 9 hours of TV in me, which is something I do on a somewhat regular basis now that we're home all the time and time is meaningless. Time is meaningless and they deliver alcohol. That really started to enrich it more and more because then I read Coates' essay, So I'm interested in your point of view, the factual basis. Does it add something to it? Does it detract? What do you think that does for a piece of fiction when the backbone of it is reality?
Well, I love something that's rooted in a history that we know. I think the book takes a history that we know and kind of subverts it a little bit by changing it. And so there's a lot of appreciation you can have for what he's trying to do there. So I have a similar appreciation for what Lindelof did, because he took something that I also did not know was something that happened. And he arguably brought it to the mainstream in a way that, a lot of people learned about it for the first time through Watchmen. And it anchors it, right? It puts the fictional character of Hooded Justice in the context of something that actually happened. So it does follow in this tradition of a historical basis.
And in the comic, Hooded Justice isn't black, right? You don't know what he is.
You don't know what he is, but the speculation is that he's like a German Nazi and that the noose was for sex stuff, not because of lynching.
Like they say when he's being interviewed in the fake TV show, the show,
right? Cheyenne Jackson, yeah.
Amazing. I mean, they break all the rules. We'll get to the rule breaking in just a sec. But just so the people in the audience don't feel so bad, how many degrees do you have, Paula V? You can include your MFA. You're going to get it. I'll approve your thesis. After that, how many degrees will you have?
After the MFA, I'm going to have 4.
You'll have 4. I have 2. So that's between us 6 collegiate degrees. And we never learned about the destruction of an entire community in 1921.
Or even the flourishing of it prior to its
nothing.
destruction.
I'd never heard the term Black Wall Street before.
Wall Street, yeah.
It was shocking. It was absolutely shocking. So, folks, I'm sure Maggie probably has found the essay, but if Maggie hasn't, go read Ta-Nehisi Coates' essay in The Atlantic about this. It's absolutely fantastic and super illuminating. And it's, in fact, history that you need to know in the next, say, 40 days, I would say. So we talked a lot about sort of the larger cultural relevance. The writing on the show is amazing. The direction in the show is amazing. So the show was nominated for 26 Emmys, which is a record, and it won 11, which is amazing, including Best Actress for Regina King, Best Supporting Actor for Abdul Mateen, and also Best Direction and Best Screenplay in a limited series.
Yes, I think it was the only comic book series or thing to win that award.
Yeah, I think you were right. So I was going along watching the first 5 episodes, and I thought, okay, this is really interesting. It's cool. I'm really enjoying it. This is a fun diversion for a month of my life that I've gone on to. Still don't really understand anything that's happening. Still pretty vague on the details. And then episode 6 shows up, the title of which is, let me tell you the name. Hold on one second.
Exquisite Being or something.
Yeah, it is This Extraordinary Being, which was directed by Stephen Williams and written by Damon Lindelof and Cord Jefferson. It aired on November 24th, 2019. And just to tell you how little things are seen on cable, I'm looking at the data here. It was seen by 620,000 people that day, which is,
Wow.
yeah, which is really low.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how low these things are. But so like comparison, like, you know, your average sitcom gets 9 million viewers or something.
Mhm.
And in this episode, Angela, played by Regina King, has taken her grandfather's nostalgia pills, which allows you to have to relive your memories, essentially. And a super awesome, great, in the middle of a show, flashback device.
Yeah, just like exposition in the best way.
Yeah, it's like I want to throw nostalgia pills into everything that I write for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So she takes these pills at the end of episode 5, and then episode 6 begins with her basically sliding into this comatose state and reliving her her grandfather's memories.
And being inside them.
And being inside them and being her grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I have ever seen an hour of television as striking, as rule breaking, as emotional. And also, it actually conveys how memory looks in my own head.
Yeah, like when she pushes open the precinct doors in the
Yes.
middle of the street.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Like that scene alone is like, oh, right, you don't need to drive anywhere in a memory. You're just,
Right.
you're here and then you're there.
Right there, right. Mm-hmm.
That, and it's in black and white for most of it.
Like kind of like when it's her, that fade into black and white from color was just masterful.
It was so amazing. I'd never seen anything like it. It tips over cliches. It also reveals all the backstory you need to know to appreciate the story. But it, instead of it just being backstory, it becomes the story.
Yeah.
And it changes everything that we have seen before. Because the thing that is confusing, well, not confusing, the thing that is distancing, I think, in the first 4 episodes is you don't know Angela. Like, you sense that you're not getting the full story about her emotional life, and you don't know why. And you really don't know why until you find out that her husband is Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah.
But that emptiness of her, I mean, it's fine for sort of a nihilistic noir superhero type person. You're Dirty Harry, you don't want to know like how they were raised. But after that episode, everything changes, but that character changes. What was your experience watching that episode?
Well, it's interesting that we were talking about rule breaking because I think Lindelof wrote some of those rules, right? Like with Lost, he created the flash forward and the flashbacks as storytelling device.
Mm-hmm.
And he took this in a really, he took this kind of imagined tech of this sci-fi world and made it into a device for him to tell this story. So it, as you said, it worked within, and it catalyzes Angela's involvement in Lady True's scheme, essentially, because it brings her into her world. But the episode itself, it was just, I think you get just as lost in those scenes as she does, right? Like it really feels like they surround and immerse you. And I don't know how they achieved that visually.
No,
it was stunning.
I want to get a copy of the script just to see
how it's written,
what it looks like on the page, because a lot of that's going to be the director's work, right?
Yeah.
Because you can write, interior deli day, but it's not going to look like that looks. And so it has to help that the showrunner is writing it. The director, Stephen Williams, is working hand in glove with the showrunner. They have an idea for it. But it's also the most comic book of the episodes, right? Because of the way, like, they're jumping through windows and it's frozen with the glass and everything.
Yeah.
It's really, I mean, all that stuff is super unusual. But the other thing that episode did for me, and I'm sort of curious about your point of view on this, is that I also felt like that was the point at which I really understood the bending of the superhero genre away from a powerful white guy in a big city to people of color in small towns, which is completely different than everything we've ever seen before.
Yeah, that's true. And I like your point about it feeling comic booky, first of all, because like if you look at these, the frames, they are not meant to be continuous. It's meant to be like like memories.
Right.
So I think that's stylistically it was really smart, but it was also unusual in that it was, they kept changing points of view between her grandfather and her. She's in it and he's in it, and they had to decide when to do that, because I think that's where they wanted her to start feeling his pain.
Right.
And that was something that came across so well in that episode, is the pain of it and what race was doing to this guy. Because the whole thing about why people didn't like the Zack Snyder movie is that the violence and the fight scenes were too superhero-y still. He made them kind of too strong and too cool. But with Will as Hooded Justice in those fight scenes, he does kick a lot of ass and he's very effective, but it's being fed by his anger. Like that's where that strength is coming from.
Yeah.
And you can feel that.
Yeah, that's a great point. That when he goes in and he saves that couple that are being mugged and she's being raped, or presumably about to be raped, he beats the crap out of those people, and it's like 4 against 1. He's just lucky they don't have a gun. But I mean, he's always lucky in those scenes where he beats up everyone that no one has a gun.
No, they did have a gun, I think, but he
he does a little Matrix shit on him. But yeah, like you can see the righteous anger is his superpower. And being right is giving him strength. It's not superhuman strength. He's just a better fighter and has larger aims.
And he goes back to his wife and says that, like, you're right, I'm angry. And she's like, this is how you're getting justice. So they're aligned in, for Black people in a small town, you can't, rely on the government, on the police for justice. And so this is really,
we're finding that out. Small town, big town.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's a great moment when he's in the phone booth and he calls his other superhero friends, and they're basically like, "Sorry, bruh, you're on your own." And he encounters the mobster who, set off this whole series of events. And instead of fighting him or talking it through or anything, he just shoots him in the head. And that's when you realize, oh God, like it's over now.
Yeah.
And it's over, and what comes after that is going to be different.
It was so satisfying, though.
It was hugely satisfying.
Maybe that we were so satisfied by that, but it is. I mean, Batman's one of his defining things is like he doesn't shoot, he doesn't kill, he doesn't use guns. But this is a human person who's angry and terrified of this operation that's growing, and he does what he needs to do.
So after that episode, though, it actually becomes. So we now know a lot more about Angela. But then this is also the onset, really, of the love story of Angela and Dr. Manhattan.
And her memories, too.
And her memories. And that, again, shifts the kind of story that's being told. It becomes a completely different series. Like, all the other conspiracy shit is still going on in there. But the emotional core is the relationship between Angela and this otherworldly being. Who has also caused, he saved the world, but also caused, great problems on top of it. But that's finally when we begin to understand Angela's emotional consequences for everything that's going on in this and why she does the things that she does. And I really like that the show takes that chance, to be 3 different things, right? To be a crime fighting show, to be a show about culture, and then finally it's a show about love. And that's,
I have to
really
say,
weird.
Dr. Manhattan is a very aggravating character because of his emotional kind of stoicness. But they did a lot of homages in terms of the characters that they use in the show and how they reflect stuff that happened in the book, because Dr. Manhattan is seen in several romantic relationships in the book, and he's kind of like typical dude. Once a woman ages out, he's like trading up to the next one.
Wow.
because he doesn't age and he has this desirability that he perceives,
Yeah, and we see the desirability in the last episode. Oh yeah.
To what are you referring?
I'm not referring to anything. I'm just saying I understand his desirability in the last episode. I see it.
Yeah, I mean, he just like
see it.
walks around butt ass naked and just like, oh, I'm cool and I have all these powers. But
Yeah.
he's also really kind of womanizing and taking advantage of these women because he's not engaged in an actual emotional relationship with them, right? Like they're seen in Vietnam where they're making love and she's like, you're not here. That happens in the book as well with Lori.
Mhm.
And it's the same, he keeps doing that.
Right.
He keeps victimizing his partners in this way emotionally.
Yeah, because he exists beyond time.
Right.
So, I mean, doesn't he say, like, I'm in Afghanistan in 1981 or something like that?
And he says something about Janie, are you cold? And Janie is his wife at the time of the accident and the one that he leaves for Lori.
Yeah. I mean, okay, fine. So he's not a great boyfriend.
No, he sucks. And he also won Vietnam by like massacring everybody.
Right. Also not just a great sort of noble dude. He does.
Right, and Lady True calls that out. She's like, he has infinite powers and he's not actually doing anything useful with them. This must be because he's a dude, so I'm going to be this woman who comes in and does it better than him.
Well, and then Hooded Justice as Lou Gossett Jr. at the end of the episode 9 basically says the same thing. He says, you know, he was a good man, but he didn't do enough.
Yeah.
For race, basically.
Yeah.
And it's a surprising but truthful turn. But of course, Hooded Justice, the character, is coming from a place of having worked his entire life for this thing. And also, by the end of his life, he's 100 years old at that point. You know, he offs Don Johnson in the first or second episode, you know, because he's in the Klan. Like, he hasn't stopped fighting just because he's in a wheelchair. He's still doing it. And so he holds Dr. Manhattan liable for the things that he hasn't done. Mm-hmm. But then there's also the idea that Dr. Manhattan sort of stops being Dr. Manhattan just to be a normal dude and be in love.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. He makes a choice that I don't think you would have seen him make in this book. And even in the last scene where his power is being sucked out and he looks at her, they really do share a moment where he's caring for her. That's true. He makes a choice to be with her and sacrifice his powers.
That's right.
Okay.
Dr. Manhattan is a good boyfriend.
All right. Maybe he loved her extra.
Yes, clearly he loved her more than he loved Jean Smart from Designing Women. So Jean Smart as a badass FBI agent.
She's amazing.
Is amazing.
She's so good in this. She's when she makes fun of that guy's panties. Yes.
And because she's playing against type, everything that she does feels really unusual. And I think she's great. Like, I want to see her just be badass FBI agent and everything.
Well, you should watch. Did you watch Legion? Because that's another comic book based show. It was on FX. It was a Noah Hawley show, and she was kind of the head of this superhero operation in that. So I think she's starting to make her way into a new type.
Well, and she was in Fargo also, so she was in that. But see, here's the thing, Pallavi, is that during the pandemic, we got Hulu. And every night before my wife goes to sleep, she watches an episode of Designing Women. And so I got the Sugar Bakers living in my house with me right now. It's either Designing Women or an unsolved murder. And then Wendy will fall asleep. And then the next morning she'll be like, who killed the woman? I'd be like, well, her husband did. It's always the husband. Although lately, maybe we'll do a binge fest for this. Lately, we've been watching a show called Unusual Suspects late at night. And that's the person kills the woman that you don't expect. So you always know that if they bring in the husband first, well, it wasn't the husband. He's the usual suspect.
Well, it's got to be like the dude Murder, She Wrote?
Pardon me?
Isn't that just like Murder, She Wrote?
How dare you? We're talking about human life. Anyway, back to the Watchmen. All right, we've got. We'll turn over to questions in just a sec for you folks. So if you've got a question, throw it in the Q&A. Let's talk about the ending, the last episode, and whether or not we believe when she eats the egg. Also, number one, never eat a raw egg.
Yeah, I mean, you can. I think it's okay.
Get E. coli from that. Like, either she's got E. coli or she's Dr. Manhattan. So, do you believe, if it hadn't cut to black, that she walked on water?
Well, I think that the point is that you want to believe, it feels really Inception-y where you're like, oh, I love this character and I want them to get what they want. But I think all of your deepest wishes kind of emerge in that moment where she walks on water, because it's a fantasy. It's
Right.
a wish. Of course you want her to have that power. You don't want it to go to waste, and you think that she might be the noblest one in this whole like band of people who could do something with it.
But
So I mean,
she above all knows that power is corruptible.
it's a problem, right?
Yeah.
It's corruptible, right? I know
So,
so her decision to, but I think that her decision, that's why the romance between them and the marriage between them is so smart, because I think her decision to consume it has more to do with her devotion to him and her love for him than for her need for power.
so you think she eats the egg
To keep
so
him
that
alive.
her husband can live inside of her? That's creepy as hell. There's this old song by a band you've never heard of, Pallavi, called Mott the Hoople, called I Wish I Was Your Mother, and it's a love song, and the line goes, I wish I was your mother, I wish I'd been your father, so I could have seen you and could have been you as a child. And like you're singing the song, you're like, this is one of the most disturbing love songs I've ever heard in my entire life. So she consumes her husband.
Well, she also bashed him over the head and broke his skull.
Right. She does cleave him as an ultimate act of love, which I hope my wife never sees. Like, this is an act of love. You know, clean the counter.
I'm about to turn you into a god. Trust me.
Oh, now that I would be into. So romantically, I get that. Like, yes, eat the egg so that you are closer to your dead god husband. That's sort of a Holy Ghost type thing. As a Jew, yeah. I might not believe in it, but I understand it sort of literally. But as a masked law enforcement agent, I also think like she's also seen all of this horror that's been wrought. She knows her own history now, and her own history is righting wrongs. Like, she knows what she knows, literally what's in her DNA. Right. And so I think she has to believe that she could take that and be both Dr. Manhattan and be herself at the same time, because she's already been hooded justice in herself at the same time, right?
Well, right. And her DNA, her grandfather also said, right, as you mentioned, you didn't do enough. And he called on Captain Metropolis, like, guys, help me. And so that's in her DNA too, that as much as she's fighting injustice, because she's a Black woman, she has to fight it harder than everybody else.
Right.
So she knows that from I mean, it's weird. She becomes a police officer after her grandfather became a police officer. So this is maybe another way she's following in his footsteps on water.
On water. It's also just an amazing ending. Like, if you're going to end a show perfectly, leave it where the audience is like, oh my God, what is going on? What is happening? Yeah. I mean, in a way, it's the anti-Sopranos conclusion, right? Like, you don't know at the end of The Sopranos whether someone has come in and shot them or if someone just dropped off cheeseburgers for The Soprano. And it doesn't really matter. Like, I mean, I remember watching it and being like, oh my God, my cable went out. Back when we had cable. Right,
because it cuts to black.
Right, because it cuts to black.
And it cuts to black here too, yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. But that one you knew, like, oh God, that was cool. But, and I said this to you yesterday, like, there's this idea that the novelist Donald Westlake imparted to me when I was a younger person. I had asked him, like, how do you know when a story is over? Like, how do you know when to stop writing? And he said, I know a story is over when the reader could write the next page. Mm-hmm. And like, that's the perfect example of the reader writing the next page. Like, she walks over, she becomes a hero, she solves all the world problems. Mm-hmm. Or she sinks. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I love that.
Speaking of The Sopranos, my favorite scene was Hoboken 1985.
Yes.
That
Loved it.
was amazingly
Loved
shot.
it.
The symbolism and then it's his Freudian moment too, right? His
Mhm.
trauma happens surrounded by mirrors, so he encases his head in a mirror.
Yeah.
And also Careless Whisper.
And
And
anytime
then
sort of a crappy city fair is put on, I'm all for it.
I've been to that very one in Hoboken for sure.
Well, and this is sort of another rule that Lindelof breaks is you know who the main characters are, but he's not afraid, even in a limited series of only 9 episodes, to go break off and have an entire episode about what you think at that point is a somewhat not meaningless, but just a secondary character.
Yeah.
But what he does so well throughout the show, and this is really for the aspiring screenwriters in the audience, which I know there's probably a few, it's really a masterclass in screenwriting and in development of a show because every character is a main character, every single one. And it just depends where they have put the focus of the camera that particular week. Everyone's really round. Everyone has main character problems. Even when they go to that family on the farm, that the farm that True buys for her land, like
Yeah.
those people are main characters in
Yeah.
another story somewhere.
But that's lost, right? That's
Right.
he created that paradigm, I think.
Yeah, of sort of a multi-faceted cast where any person at any given time could be the lead banana.
And even like we were talking about this too, that I had no idea that Cal was Dr. Manhattan because he felt peripheral, but even that was a deliberate choice. He was pretty central and integral.
Yeah, I had no idea either because I didn't know who Dr. Manhattan was. And I knew that he was on the moon or Mars or something.
Yeah, yeah.
That I mean, let's also just be clear, like so extraordinarily well acted. Everyone was great. But the dude who played Dr. Manhattan, he made me want to get really tall, really buff, and buy Henleys. I don't look right in a Henley with like the circular collar. I don't have that kind of body because I'm sort of a middle-aged Jewish person. But he made me want to get fit and tall. So I can get fit, but I can't get tall. But just
really,
across
and
the
he was
board.
kind of like doting, devoted husband.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. But did you get the sense, because Lori has like this obsession with him, right? She's like, you got this hot husband. I went to see Cal. And I was like, oh, yeah. She's being funny and sassy. But do you think that she knew? Because it seems like maybe everybody knew except for Angela. Well, Angela knew too.
Right. I think she had a good sense of it. At any rate, she felt his presence because, you know, she could feel his presence. You know, she was calling him and, you know,
Right.
I feel like despite the fact that he was a bad boyfriend, because he was out busy saving the world, and like sometimes you can't just hang out when you're saving the world, that she probably, when she was around him, felt whatever that kinetic energy might be.
Yeah. Well, it
Just
seemed like the senator knew too, right? Because they knew where to find him.
Right. The senators seemed to know.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe, you know, I mean, they must have had some clear idea, but not in an obvious way. I mean,
right.
You know, and if someone else knows the answer to this, put it in there. All right, so let's take some questions. I have our Q&A open. Let's see here. Jenny Hayes, former Berkeley teen, Jenny Hayes has a question. She says, I loved Watchmen, never read or watched any of the earlier stuff, not a huge comics or superhero fan, but loved the characters and weirdness and how the storylines were surprising in a way that felt inevitable. What should I watch next? Well, I've been watching The Boys on Amazon. There's 2 seasons of that. And it's deeply, deeply messed up.
Yeah. The Boys, I think the critique of Garth Ennis's work in The Boys, the artist, is that by contrast to Alan Moore, who did this kind of psychological profiling, he was just like, superheroes are dicks and let me like humiliate them and make them awful. So it's mean, but The Boys, the TV show, is very watchable. I would also, if you like the kind of weirdness and surrealness that happened with this show in a superhero kind of universe, that's very stylized. I liked Legion. a lot of people were turned off by Legion in that first season because they're like, what is happening? But it's kind of another kind of lush world to be immersed in.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. There was a British show about superheroes, the title of which I can't remember. That Jenny, I'll let you know about. But I have a real. I don't like superhero shows either. Like I never watched any of the Marvel stuff, like the stuff that was on Netflix. I have a hard time caring about people who have all these great big powerful superpowers, which is why I think Watchmen is different, because they don't have any superpowers. You know, they're just people. Okay, and I'm trying to think if there's anything else good that I've been watching lately. Actually, you know what I've been watching lately? So Jenny, this has nothing to do with superheroes, but I've really enjoyed it. Is 000. So if you're fascinated by the cocaine trade and organized crime, 000 is really good, and it's in English, Spanish, and Italian, which is also cool to experience.
Also, Lovecraft Country feels similar thematically and visually.
Absolutely. Lovecraft Country, I've really enjoyed. And they do a different sort of Lovecraft story in every single episode. And also, more importantly, for the alums of the MFA program in the audience, in episode 5, Carrie Piccola's husband is in it. Dave Stambra is in it. Character, yes. He plays a bad guy.
That's fun.
Yes, he's in it. Let's see here. Anonymous attendee says, is the egg a metaphor for your life in whole, full cycle? You are complete, similar to how eggs are used in the Passover meal. Story is over. Well, yeah, I think clearly the egg is a metaphor because, in fact, Lou Gossett Jr. uses it as a metaphor when they're talking in the theater, right? Like he says, you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And then Regina King's like, what are you?
Well, it comes up a lot. I mean, it's the farm couple who are infertile. So, you know, definitely egg as a metaphor for fertility. And I think because the TV show Watchmen is so much more of a female-centric show than the comic is, that might have been a deliberate choice. And even like her first, when she's doing the show and tell with the kids, there's, a lot of kind of an egg being something and then turning into something else.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of what's in the egg is not what actually becomes outside of the egg. Like what the caterpillar calls the end of the world, we call a butterfly. You know?
Right. And whereas this is all about like seeds being planted, that one's all about like blossoming and eggs. And so it's very feminine, I think.
But also, to be clear, never eat a raw egg. Like you see it in Rocky, don't do it.
Have you ever had a drink with like an egg white? That's raw.
Is it?
So don't order those, I guess.
Isn't that just phosphate?
No,
that's not a real egg, is it?
Like shake the egg white, and that's what makes it frothy.
Huh.
Yeah.
I think it's the yolk that's the problem. If people know,
I'm pretty sure it's the shell that's the problem.
The shell. You never eat the egg.
Don't eat the shell.
Never eat the egg. This is something Pallavi's mom taught her. So, folks, if you're interested in this, for more of that homespun advice, Pallavi's mom is in the comments. You can talk to her. Let's see here. There's someone who's just giving me a compliment. Thank you. I am super handsome.
Try a Henley.
Lindsay Harris says American Gods has a similarly confusing but engaging effect. Absolutely. American Gods,
a good suggestion.
Which is based on a Neil Gaiman book.
That one's on Starz.
Yeah, it's on Starz. I think they've got 2 or 3 seasons, although they fired the entire writing staff in the middle of the 2nd season, and the actors began to write their own episodes, and that became a problem.
Oh, no.
Yeah, a little inside baseball for you.
Well, remember Lost, like, had the writer's strike happen halfway through the show?
Right.
So that could be to blame for some of the stuff.
I don't think so. I think they just didn't know what
they made their bed early.
You know, it's another good one, Jenny Hayes, is Good Omens. That's another good one that you might like. And that's a devil and an angel together solving the world's problems.
Prime, I think.
Yeah. That one's more like a Doctor Who type vibe than a superhero type vibe. Well, Pallavi, thank you so much for joining me here tonight. This was great fun talking to you.
So much fun.
Folks, if you haven't watched the show yet, you're screwed. We just revealed every single important part of it, and we're sorry about that.
But it's not too late to read the book.
Yeah, we should. I'm actually going to read the book now that I know what's exactly happening. But hey, if you've enjoyed Binge Fest, I'm sure we'll do something again soon, particularly if we're stuck in our homes, where we can all get together and talk about things that are cool. But what I do know for sure is that Arts and Letters is coming back in October. We'll be joined by the novelist Rachel Housel Hall to talk about her brand new book. She is absolutely fantastic. If you like crime fiction, Rachel is a big upcoming star. She just was at our last residency too, and she gave an amazing workshop. And so I wanted to introduce her to a wider audience and have her talk to me about her books and her life. So we'll be doing that, Arts and Letters, at the end of October. And one last thing, please, everybody, vote so that we can do these in person again sometime soon. Pallavi, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate you. Take care, everyone.